What would you do if you saw someone struggling to be heard, ignored, dismissed, and treated as invisible simply because they couldn't speak? Would you walk away, or would you stand up for them? In a world that often overlooks those who communicate differently, Ethan, a young man who can't speak, found himself at the center of an unexpected confrontation in a bustling diner. All he wanted was to celebrate a personal triumph. But when a dismissive waiter made him feel small and unseen, an unlikely ally stepped forward, someone who refused to let indifference win. What unfolded wasn't just a clash over a meal. It became a powerful reminder that kindness, courage, and standing up for others can ripple far beyond a single moment. Would you have done the same? Before we continue this story, let us know where you are watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Ethan had always K. Now his life will be different. Born in a small town with limited opportunities for everyone, let alone someone like him. He learned early on that the world often wasn't set up to accommodate those who couldn't speak. From the time he was old enough to understand his own disability, he realized he would need to work twice as hard to make himself understood. This never stopped him, though. Instead, it fueled him. He used gestures, learned to write succinctly, and developed a repertoire of facial expressions that could communicate more than most people ever realized. It wasn't an easy path. His parents, hard-working and supportive, had initially felt lost about how to help him. But Ethan's determination shone brighter than any uncertainty. Over time, he discovered online courses that allowed him to learn at his own pace. He relished each small triumph, particularly the sense of independence these achievements gave him. So when he completed a challenging online course, a milestone many had doubted he could reach, he felt compelled to celebrate in a place that symbolized normalcy, a bustling restaurant. That afternoon, he entered a cozy diner located on a busy street corner. Its large windows allowed natural light to stream in, illuminating walls adorned with vintage photographs. It wasn't the fanciest place in town, but it felt welcoming, a perfect backdrop for his personal victory. Moving carefully to a table near the window, Ethan reached into his bag for his trusty blue notebook, his usual companion for places where sign language wasn't widely understood. His heart sank when he realized he'd left it at home. It was an annoying oversight, but he decided to press on, determined not to let the day be ruined. Moments later, a waiter named Tyler approached, juggling a notepad and a palpable sense of urgency. He was young, perhaps in his early 20s, and clearly flustered from the midday rush. "Table for one, right?" he asked, barely glancing at Ethan. "What would you like to order?" Ethan smiled in a friendly way, then gestured to the menu, pointing at a particular dish he wanted to try. The gesture was clear, but Tyler merely sighed. "Look, I don't have all day. If you can't tell me what you want, I can't help you," he said brusquely. Then he pivoted away, leaving Ethan feeling momentarily stunned. Ethan looked around the restaurant, noticing people chatting happily, clinking their cutlery against plates, and weaving narratives of their own lives. For a moment, he felt invisible, overshadowed by the casual normalcy everyone else seemed to enjoy. Still, he reminded himself that he had overcome far bigger hurdles than an impatient waiter. He steeled his resolve and awaited Tyler's return. A few minutes later, Tyler came back, seemingly more impatient than before. "Are you ready yet?" he asked, arms crossed. Ethan tried again, pointing more deliberately to the item on the menu. Instead of even trying to understand, Tyler let out a short, humorless laugh. "I can't read your mind," he grumbled. "This is a restaurant, not a charity workshop." Several people glanced over, their conversations halting mid-sentence. The tension grew palpable. Ethan's heart pounded, but he refused to show any sign of discouragement. He tapped the menu again, this time tracing his finger under the name of the dish. Tyler shook his head in exasperation. "Man, this is getting ridiculous. I have other customers to serve." Across the dining room, one particular patron hadn't missed a moment of this exchange. Tall, composed, and sporting a thoughtful demeanor, he sat alone at a small table near the back. Though he appeared to be just another customer, there was an air of quiet observation about him. His gaze remained fixed on Ethan and Tyler, as though gauging whether he should intervene. Tyler muttered under his breath and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Ethan to manage the weight of disapproving stares. Some patrons looked at Ethan sympathetically but remained silent. Others simply returned to their meals, unwilling to get involved. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, inhaled slowly, and reaffirmed to himself that giving in to frustration was an option. He was there to celebrate, and he would not allow someone's impatience to tarnish his hard-earned sense of pride. When Tyler reemerged, his tone was hostile from the get-go. "If you can't order like everyone else, maybe you should go somewhere else," he snapped. The hush in the restaurant deepened, and Ethan's chest tightened. He fought to keep his composure as Tyler continued. "Look, you're messing up my workflow. Either figure out how to communicate or head home." That was the moment the mysterious observer finally stood. With an effortless grace, he laid his napkin aside and began walking toward Ethan's table. As he approached, the low hum of talk in the restaurant dissipated into an almost reverent silence. Ethan noticed his tall frame and calm stride, but he couldn't anticipate what would happen next. Tyler, arms folded defiantly, turned to face the newcomer, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "I think we've seen enough," the stranger said, his voice resonating across the quiet diner. The words weren't loud, but they carried a decided weight. He stopped next to Ethan's chair, meeting Tyler's gaze with an unwavering calm. Though no one in the restaurant knew who he was just yet, his presence alone demanded attention. Time seemed to freeze as the stranger stood beside Ethan, his posture relaxed yet resolute. The restaurant's patrons, sensing the change in atmosphere, paused their conversations and turned their focus to the unfolding scene. Tyler maintained his stance, arms crossed over his chest, seemingly unwilling to yield. The tension in the air could have been cut with a knife. Ethan, glancing up at the man, felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief, because someone was stepping in when he'd felt most exposed. Apprehension, because he feared how Tyler might react. He also worried about being the cause of confrontation. Still, he silently thanked the stranger for his concern. "Excuse me," Tyler said sarcastically. "Is there a problem?" The question was rhetorical, dripping with challenge. He looked the stranger up and down, clearly unimpressed by the intervention. The stranger answered with a quiet firmness. "Yes, there is. You're treating this customer unfairly, and it needs to stop." Although he spoke calmly, each word resonated with conviction. "I don't think anyone should be humiliated for having difficulty speaking." A ripple of reaction swept through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, their earlier hesitation melting away under the stranger's assertive stance. Others simply watched with wide eyes, as though witnessing a scene in a film. The only person not swayed was Tyler, who rolled his eyes. "Look, buddy, I'm just doing my job," Tyler retorted. "The guy can't tell me what he wants, and I've got tables to serve. I'm not a mind reader." His voice rose, and the restaurant seemed to shrink around them, all attention locked on this tense exchange. The stranger took a step forward, but his expression remained controlled. "Isn't your job to serve people? To make sure every customer gets what they need?" he asked, never breaking eye contact. "Or are you only willing to serve those who fit your idea of easy?" Tyler opened his mouth to speak, but he couldn't seem to craft a coherent response. He glanced around, possibly hoping for backup from his fellow waiters. Yet the others stood rooted to the spot, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. The stranger looked at Ethan and offered him a small nod, a quiet assurance that he had support. For Ethan, the tension felt both dizzying and empowering. He couldn't remember the last time someone had so publicly championed his right to be treated with dignity. Usually, he had to handle these situations alone, deflecting rude comments with a forced smile or letting awkwardness pass without any fuss. Having an ally, especially one as poised and quietly forceful as this stranger, felt like a groundbreaking moment. Tyler finally found his voice again. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but this is a private matter between me and the customer." His words came out defensive, brittle. "And if he can't communicate what he wants, that's not my fault." The stranger raised an eyebrow. "Not your fault. Maybe, but definitely your responsibility. There are ways to figure out what someone wants to order, even if they don't speak. You just haven't tried. A few heads nodded among the patrons. Encouraged by the subtle show of support, the stranger pressed on. This ends now. A hush fell. Tyler stared at the stranger, struggling to maintain the bluster that had carried him this far. Everyone expected the waiter to retort with another dismissive remark. Instead, Tyler hesitated. His composure faltered. And in that moment of uncertainty, the stranger turned to Ethan. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded, then made a quick sign, thanking him. He also pointed to the menu, the same item he'd been trying to communicate about. The stranger nodded in understanding and picked up the menu. He then turned back to Tyler. "He wants this dish, correct? Should be straightforward enough. Now, can you handle that professionally?" For a moment, Tyler looked utterly cornered. The eyes of the entire restaurant bore into him, silently demanding he do the right thing. At last, he grabbed the menu from the stranger's hand, grumbling under his breath. "Fine. Whatever." He jotted down the order with a frustrated flourish and stalked toward the kitchen, leaving the stranger and Ethan standing in the aftermath of the confrontation. A wave of tension released from the room. The stranger placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Don't worry," he said in a kind voice. "This will work out." Ethan offered a grateful smile, wishing he had his notebook to convey a more elaborate thank you. But somehow, he sensed the stranger already understood. As the restaurant's patrons gradually returned to their meals, hushed conversations filled the space. Some people watched the stranger with a mixture of curiosity and awe, as though trying to place his face. He was familiar, yet incongruous in this everyday setting. Had they seen him somewhere before? A middle-aged couple by the window shot each other a significant glance, and the wife leaned in to whisper something. Across the aisle, a group of friends quietly debated if they recognized the man from a movie screen. Ethan caught snippets of their murmurs, but was too overwhelmed to process it all. When Tyler returned with Ethan's dish, he didn't say a word. He placed the plate on the table with curt efficiency, then walked away. The manager, drawn out by the escalating drama, finally appeared. His expression was uneasy, and he surveyed the diner, as if trying to assess whether a crisis had unfolded in his absence. Spotting the stranger, he made his way over, stepping gingerly between tables and offering apologetic nods to customers. The stranger turned to greet him, and that was when the manager's eyes went wide. Recognition flickered across his face, and he clamped his mouth shut, momentarily speechless. The rest of the diner seemed to hold its collective breath, curious about the manager's reaction. And Ethan, seated in the center of it all, could feel the energy shift yet again, anticipating that this day was far from over. The manager, whose name tag read Frank, stood there staring at the stranger as though seeing a ghost. He cleared his throat, struggling to maintain composure. Finally, he forced a polite smile. I didn't realize you were dining here today," he said, voice unsteady. "Is everything all right?" The stranger nodded politely, ignoring the swirl of whispers that was now rippling through the customers. "I'm fine," he replied. "But your waiter, Tyler, is clearly unaware of how to handle a customer with different needs. I felt I had to step in." Frank's eyes flickered with concern as he glanced at Ethan, who was still seated, trying to eat his meal in peace. Then Frank looked back at the stranger. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea," he said, shaking his head ruefully. "Tyler's behavior is inexcusable." At this, Ethan set his fork down and gestured to Frank, trying to convey that all he wanted was to enjoy his meal like anybody else. Without his usual notebook, the conversation felt more complicated, but the manager seemed to get the gist. "Yes, of course," Frank said, nodding. "I understand. I'm terribly sorry for the inconvenience and disrespect you faced." He turned once more to the stranger, his posture deferential. "I like to make this right. Your meals are on the house." The stranger's face remained impassive. "That's kind of you. But the point is larger than a free meal." He glanced at Ethan. "He deserves to be treated with dignity. Everyone does. People who are nonverbal or who communicate differently shouldn't have to fight this hard just to order lunch. Frank looked crestfallen, recognizing the truth in those words. "You're absolutely right," he said, exhaling heavily. "I'll speak to Tyler immediately. That kind of attitude is not acceptable here." From across the restaurant, a cluster of waiters exchanged anxious looks. They'd all witnessed the scene with varying degrees of discomfort, but none had jumped in to stop it. The hush persisted, and the stranger gently placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "Are you okay?" he asked again, softly. Ethan nodded, giving a thumbs up. He mouthed the word, "Thank you," though no sound came out. The stranger acknowledged it with a small, warm smile. Sensing that the situation was partly resolved, some of the patrons returned to their meals. A few offered Ethan supportive nods or smiles, as if silently congratulating him for his bravery. Others continued to stare, still taken aback by the revelation that had dawned on them. The stranger was Keanu Reeves. While not everyone in the restaurant had put a name to that famous face, the manager and a growing number of customers clearly had. A middle-aged woman at a nearby table mustered the nerve to speak. "Thank you," she said to Keanu, her voice trembling with respect. "It's good to see someone stand up for people with disabilities. Not everyone would do that." Keanu offered a polite nod. "I appreciate your kind words," he replied, his tone quiet but sincere. "I just did what anyone should do." Meanwhile, Tyler lurked near the kitchen entrance, looking as though he'd rather vanish than face the fallout. Frank beckoned him over with a grim expression. "Tyler, you are guest." And this gentleman, an apology, the manager stated, gesturing first to Ethan, then to Keanu. "Your behavior was appalling." With a downcast gaze, Tyler shuffled to the table. His bravado had evaporated, replaced by a surly contrition. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, glaring at the floor. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," Frank interjected. "You were rude and dismissive because you didn't want to take the time to understand. That's not who we are as a restaurant, and it's not who you should be as a server." Tyler swallowed hard and nodded, offering no additional excuses. He peeked at Ethan, who was finishing his meal with quiet determination. "Sorry," he repeated more earnestly, though it was clear he struggled to meet Ethan's eyes. Ethan, for his part, managed a small nod. He didn't relish seeing people berated. He simply wanted to ensure that no one else would experience what he had gone through moments earlier. Keanu stood calmly by, observing Tyler and Frank with a collected air. Frank continued, "I'll be speaking with you about sensitivity training, Tyler. We're not done here. For now, why don't you head to the back? I need a word with you in my office." Tyler shot another nervous glance around the diner, then disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Frank to address Ethan and Keanu once more. "Please forgive me," he said, voice tinged with genuine regret. "If there's anything else I can do to make your experience better, just let me know." Then, leaning closer to Ethan, he added, "We'll do better. I promise." Ethan nodded, relieved that Frank was taking the matter seriously. He picked up his fork again, determined to finish his celebratory meal. Keanu returned to his own table, leaving Ethan to savor some measure of normalcy. By now, word had spread quietly among the patrons about who Keanu Reeves was. A hum of subdued excitement rippled through the restaurant. But most people respected his privacy, awed by how naturally he had stepped in to defend Ethan. A teenage girl snapped a sneaky picture with her phone, only to be chided by her older sister. Others seemed content to watch from afar, stirred by the realization that they'd just witnessed a movie star-worthy moment of kindness in real life. Yet for Ethan, that star status wasn't the core of the story. What mattered more was that someone with the influence to change the tone of an entire room had used it to stand up for him. That fact alone carried more weight than any blockbuster film or media headline could. The tension in the restaurant slowly ebbed, replaced by a reflective calm that enveloped both staff and patrons. Ethan, relieved that the immediate confrontation had ended, ate his meal in silence. He noticed that when one of the other servers passed by, their eyes met his with an apologetic glimmer. Though the staff member said nothing, the expression of regret was clear. A bit later, Frank returned to Ethan's table and offered a hesitant smile. I just wanted to check if you need anything else, he said, voice noticeably kinder than before. Ethan shook his head, returning a polite smile of his own. He gestured with his hand, a simple sign for thank you, and Frank nodded, understanding enough to respond, "You're welcome." At the other end of the restaurant, Keanu Reeves observed discreetly. He had resumed eating his own meal, but his attention periodically drifted to Ethan, ensuring that no further trouble arose. Having spent years in the public eye, he was accustomed to onlookers recognizing him. However, the hush in the diner felt unique. People weren't just starstruck, they were introspective, as if the incident with Tyler had sparked a collective realization of how easily thoughtlessness can hurt someone. Soon, a woman in a floral dress stood up from her booth and approached Keanu's table. Her steps were tentative, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. My nephew is nonverbal, and it means a lot to see someone stand up for someone like him." Keanu offered her a gentle smile. "I appreciate that," he replied. "I hope your nephew is treated well wherever he goes. Everyone deserves dignity." The woman nodded, teary-eyed, then quietly returned to her seat, clearly moved by his words. Ethan finished his food and set down his utensils, sighing with relief. Despite the rocky start, he managed to enjoy his celebratory meal. Part of him still wished he had brought his notebook, but the day's events had proven something important. Even without his usual tools, he could persist. A wave of gratitude washed over him, not just for Keanu's help, but for the unexpected solidarity he'd seen from other customers and, belatedly, from Frank. When Ethan signaled for the bill, Frank practically sprinted over. "Please," the manager insisted, "it's on the house. If you'd let us, we'd like to show we're truly sorry." Ethan considered protesting. It wasn't pity he wanted, after all, but Frank seemed earnest. With a thankful nod, Ethan acquiesced. He pushed his chair back and prepared to leave, pausing briefly to scan the room. The entire atmosphere felt transformed. Conversations that had once buzzed with idle chatter now carried a subdued warmth, as though each person in the diner had been reminded of something essential. Basic human kindness matters. People were exchanging understanding smiles, and he even caught sight of a few customers practicing small gestures of sign language among themselves, giggling at their own inexperience. It was a far cry from the tense hostility Tyler had demonstrated just an hour before. As Ethan began to walk toward the door, he noticed Keanu rising from his table as well. Their eyes met. In that moment, Ethan found himself silently conveying a depth of gratitude he couldn't fully articulate. Keanu gave a gentle nod, as if to say, "No thanks needed." Still, Ethan stepped closer, took a pen from the counter, and scribbled a brief note on a paper napkin. "Thank you for everything." He handed the napkin to Keanu with a warm smile. Keanu read it, returned Ethan's smile, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "My pleasure," he said softly. "I'm glad you stood your ground." They exited together, leaving the restaurant staff and patrons feeling as though a quiet but meaningful lesson had just been taught. Outside, the city's busy sidewalk bustled with people hurrying by, unaware of the drama that had unfolded inside. Cars honked and street vendors called out, but for a moment, Ethan felt perfectly still, anchored by the reassurance that the world wasn't as indifferent as it sometimes seemed, and mouthed the words, "I promise." Keanu gave him a final reassuring pat on the shoulder, then slipped into the flow of pedestrians, disappearing down the street. For a moment, Ethan stood there, absorbing the hum of the city. Then he spotted his reflection in the window of a nearby shop. He looked the same, but he felt changed, buoyed by an unexpected ally's kindness and the restaurant's shift in attitude. He turned to head home, his spirit lighter than it had been in a long while. Unbeknownst to him, though, the story of that day would soon spread far beyond the diner's walls. Word of the incident traveled rapidly through the community. One diner patron had quietly recorded snippets of the confrontation, capturing Tyler's harsh words and Keanu Reeves's calm but decisive intervention. The brief video, posted on social media, quickly gained traction. People were drawn not just by Keanu's celebrity status, but by the stark reminder of how everyday cruelty can be confronted by simple acts of solidarity. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon reporters were visiting the restaurant to interview Frank, the manager, who expressed genuine remorse. "We're implementing a new training program for our staff," he explained to a local journalist. "We want to ensure that everyone, regardless of how they communicate, feels welcomed here. I messed up by not addressing Tyler's behavior sooner, and I intend to fix that." Meanwhile, Tyler found himself the subject of intense criticism. Online commenters called him out for his insensitivity, and some even demanded that he lose his job. Yet others argued that firing him wouldn't accomplish real change. Instead, they believed Tyler should learn from the experience and commit to treating customers better. Through it all, Tyler stayed out of the public eye, taking time to reflect on the gravity of his actions. Ethan's life also changed in subtle but important ways. He received messages of support from strangers, many of whom were nonverbal themselves or had family members who struggled with communication. They saw in him a quiet resilience and thanked him for standing up for his rights, even if he hadn't intended to become a role model. Feeling both overwhelmed and honored, Ethan responded whenever he could, using social media as a platform to share sign language basics and resources for inclusive communication. A week after the incident, Ethan mustered the courage to return to the restaurant. This time, he brought his blue notebook, determined to fully express himself if necessary. He felt anxious stepping through the door, half expecting the same tension from before. Instead, he was greeted by a warm smile from the hostess, who recognized him immediately. "Welcome back," she said gently. "We're glad to see you." To his relief, the restaurant had made visible changes. Near the entrance stood a small sign bearing the words, "All are welcome here," accompanied by illustrations that depicted various forms of communication, including sign language. The moment Ethan stepped inside, a new waiter approached, a young woman named Mia. "Hi," she said, giving him an open grin. "My name's Mia. Let me know how you'd like to communicate, and I'll do my best to help." Ethan flipped open his notebook and quickly wrote, "Thank you, Mia. I appreciate it." She read the words and nodded, eyes lighting up. "That's a cool notebook," she remarked, eager to put him at ease. Mia was still learning sign language, she explained, but she knew a few phrases. She awkwardly signed something akin to, "How are you?" which made Ethan laugh softly. He nodded, scribbling back a response to let her know he was doing well. As he sat at a table near the window, the same one from his last visit, he took in the changes around him. Staff members seemed more patient, pausing to listen carefully when patrons spoke. Even Tyler was around, moving quietly between tables, no longer sporting the arrogant swagger from before. At one point, Tyler caught Ethan's eye. He hesitated, then offered a small nod, an unspoken apology that Ethan decided to accept with a polite nod of his own. While he waited for his meal, Ethan spotted a notice board near the kitchen entrance. It featured hand-drawn diagrams of basic sign language, along with instructions about how to approach customers who might need alternative forms of communication. A sense of pride washed over him, knowing that his difficult experience had triggered positive change, not just for him, but for everyone who walked through these doors. The real surprise came as he was finishing his meal. He glimpsed a familiar figure entering the diner, a presence that immediately charged the atmosphere with anticipation. It was Keanu Reeves once again, wearing a simple jacket and jeans, a baseball cap pulled low. He scanned the room, spotted Ethan, and gave a friendly wave before taking a seat at an inconspicuous corner table. Ethan, heart pounding, felt a sudden rush of gratitude. He picked up his notebook, scribbled a greeting, and walked over to Keanu's table. In neat letters, he wrote, "Good to see you again. Thank you for everything. The restaurant has really changed." Keanu read the words with a smile, then quietly replied, "I'm glad. You deserve a place where you can be yourself." As they shared a moment of quiet understanding, the rest of the restaurant went on about its business, but many customers discreetly observed them. For Ethan, it felt like closure, a testament to how a single stand against injustice could ripple outward, touching countless lives. And for Keanu, it was another chance to show, in the simplest way, that standing up for someone costs nothing but can mean everything. The transformation at that little restaurant serves as a powerful reminder that respect can, and should, be universal. Ethan's experience spotlighted the need to accommodate different communication styles rather than dismiss them. What began as a hurtful encounter with a dismissive waiter evolved into a moment of deep compassion, steered by Keanu Reeves's timely intervention. The ripple effect was extraordinary. Staff training sessions were introduced, signage became more inclusive, and a broader conversation about empathy was sparked, both online and within the local community. Most of all, Ethan himself came away stronger. He had walked into the restaurant simply wanting to celebrate a milestone, never expecting to become a catalyst for change. Yet his quiet resilience and refusal to back down exposed an everyday injustice many people face. By standing his ground, and with an ally who recognized the importance of his dignity, Ethan's story resonated far beyond the diner's walls. Life may still present him with challenges, but now, Ethan carries not only his trusty blue notebook, but also the knowledge that a single act of kindness can shift an entire room. The staff, likewise, learned that genuine service goes beyond taking orders or delivering food. It's about acknowledging each person's inherent worth. And for everyone who witnessed the confrontation, the enduring takeaway is this: speaking up against cruelty or ignorance can transform a simple moment into a profound lesson in human decency.